Hello everyone and welcome back to Wargame Red Dragon. We have a community cast here for you guys today that was submitted by the private Kyla Flowers, who appears to be a relatively newer player. And the first thing off the bat that I'm going to say is that the opener is super important. And to talk about this game, to give some thoughts on it, as well as just to talk about Eurocore, which is the deck that Kyla is playing, I do have Bikefish with me in the Discord as well to give his advice. You want to talk? You want to introduce yourself for a minute?
Yeah, I'll do that when we kind of watch the opener play out here. But I think you should slow it down to 0.5 so we don't get too far ahead because we do have some stuff to talk about right away. So yeah, I'm Bikefish. I'm one of the instructors over on the Bootcamp Discord. Really been playing this game for a while, but really only trying to get good at competitive 1v1 for, about a couple years here since we all got locked inside for that unfortunate incident.
I think a lot of people are like that. And just to point out this, like, we're 30 seconds in, and the home zone is not capped. So when you get things going, I like that there were 3 columns here, and Bikefish, I want your take on this as well. But the first thing that you do, in my mind, is you get this moving, and you have to get your home CV, and it's a requirement. You need to get your reinforcements in basically as soon as you start to have the ability to, which 30 seconds in is about 50 points. And then if you're slow off the jump, your opponent will get an advantage.
Let's leave it paused here for a second just so we can kind of talk this through before things get too far away. So, like you were saying, definitely getting things moving in the opener is good. For those of you who are new and still learning, a trick you can do is if you have everything kind of placed on the road that's going to take you to approximately where you want it to go, which to Flowers' credit was accomplished in this game. So, that's good.
1, 2, and 3 with these 3 roads.
As long as you have everything that's going to approximately the same spot, what you can do is just select it all and get it moving towards your ultimate objective. And you can do that just, select each group, fast move, select
click, drag, and then you hit the hotkey for fast move and then click. And if you're really lazy like me and you put it on tab, which I don't recommend, it's very simple. It's just click, drag, and then tap and go. And if we actually look just for a second, we won't do much of this, but if we look just for a second at Flowers' opponent, look at how much farther along I don't understand is compared to Flowers. So actually, let's maybe go to neutral for this. So 1, 2, 3 columns. This column over on this side moved all the way from over here, and it's a pretty good distance. It is motorized, it is very quick, but there's only really one column that's sort of like that for Flowers, and it's over here, and even then, it's a shorter distance. And particularly in golf, when there's a big rush to get to this section of town, you really need to be fast off the jump, and that one change will make your games so much easier. Getting stuff moving early will make your game so much easier. It's absurd. Like, you won't believe me until you do it, and then once you do it, it's like...
So keep it paused here for a second, because I do want to take a brief interlude and kind of zoom out and look at some of the strategy of this map. So if we're looking at Hell in a Very Small Place, you're going to notice very quickly that there are 3 bridges that kind of come out of the zone you spawn in that allow you to access the rest of the map. And the way this map will normally play out is that the fight is over control of trying to lock your opponent or not get locked behind the bridges, because getting across bridges is incredibly difficult. So keep that in mind as we're watching this, that's ultimately kind of the goal, and hopefully you'll be able to see where Flowers' opponent is really a little bit more aware of that and is working to actively make that happen.
Gotcha. And just to show what that really means for Red, if Red can push Bravo up to about here and Blue can't cross the bridge, Bravo's locked down. Red's not getting back in. On the other hand, if Blue can fight all the way up into Charlie and lock down this bridge, retaking Charlie is very tough. I mean, yeah, you need this one as well for it, but even just the one makes it so much tougher because everything has to funnel in from one direction. And then on the far side, if Red, and this is what we said was really important in the opener, if Red can get up here and lock this down, then getting into Golf is very tough for Blue. And if we spin around one last time, if Blue can fight all the way up to here, then it's very tough for Red to get back into Golf. And, there are other things you can do. You can come in from the sides, you can come in, down this ledge as well. It's just... first principles, what you do and don't want to lose, because it just makes it so much harder, and that translates into trading poorly, which has long-term consequences. Does that sort of sum everything up there, we think, for the opener?
Yeah, and And we'll kind of see a little more as it unfolds about the actual composition of what gets sent where, so we can kind of let it play while we're talking about that. But one of the things that that Kyla has a little bit of trouble with here is the, like, what's the word I want to use? The spear point of the opener, the Schwerpunkt, if you will. Pardon me the pun, since we're playing something with Germany involved. But what you're really looking for in an opener is that you're trying to commit a majority of your points to taking a certain objective and are just trying to cover the map as best you can with the rest of them. The reasoning for this is if you don't have a critical mass of stuff, it's going to be a lot harder for you to actually do something in your opener aside from just sit there. And ultimately, just sitting there allows your opponent to choose where they're going to be strong, and you're trying to be strong everywhere, which ultimately will cost you ground.
Another thing I want to point out too is if you look at the differences in those spearheads, from blue we have lots of recoilless rifle jeeps, which are very good. We have a 10 RCSB, which is a fast wheeled tank. We have a VAB, Commandos Para, for a recon once they're unloaded. And the spearhead over here are 2 VABs and a Kratal. Now this is blind because there's no recon. And the sheer number of guns, the amount of firepower that it can dish out, is actually far smaller, even though these recoilless rifle jeeps are really cheap. So when you have these good units like recoilless rifle jeeps that can really help in the first couple minutes of the game, use them, because your opponent will. And I mean, yeah, the wall of reservists and AMX-13 VTTs will grind this out a little bit. So I actually kind of criticize, I don't understand that for this, because the initial success was good. This is probably just doomed to failure, even just to reservists, but we can see the difference in the opening punch between those two compositions.
Yeah, and really what it comes down to here is while Flowers' units that are there were able to kind of, blunt that push, there wasn't enough meat there to be able to actually push back or push the attack on here. Using the Tiger's missiles on these is kind of a big oversight. They're very cheap. You don't want to be wasting the HOTS on these.
So think for a second,
because what you really
happened...
should have here is a tank of some sort, which we see the Brennus moving up, but we're going to have a talk about the Brennuses a little bit later. What would have been really great here would have been a Martyr 2.
Yeah, and so when you're playing as Eurocorps, and this is why, so Bikefish will be, I think we'll have some videos up either today or tomorrow for getting into unit comparisons for Eurocorps. We're also going to take a look at Flowers' deck at the end of this, just make some minor suggestions. But things like Panzergren in Martyr 2s can be basically mini tanks, tankette type deals. And they'll wreck 10 RCSBs in that sort of class of fast vehicle, really much more than you might think.
Pause?
Yep.
And continue, but I just wanted to pause the replay for a second because I do want to talk about something here once you're done.
Wait, so...
keep the replay paused, continue what you were saying.
Yeah, the next thing I was going to say was just, if we take a look as well, that Tiger... was really the last bit of recon that was up here for red. Blue has recon infantry here, and because of that 65-point Brennus was taken out by a 10 RCSB for 40 points, which in a head-to-head fight 1-to-1 the Brennus should win that. So recon is my other comment here, is recon. If you think you have enough recon, you're wrong, because you lose the recon helo and you're blind. You lose the single recon infantry, you're blind, right? Like,
keep it paused. We're getting past what I wanted to do.
Yeah, sorry.
So yes, recon, very important, but it's also important to just keep a note of like, hey, especially in the opening phase of the map, you do need that recon to be where you want to attack. In this position, you didn't necessarily need to have that recon overwatching the river, especially such an expensive recon unit like the Tiger. Which when you lose it is a 140-point hole in your setup. If you had I'm looking at Flowers' deck on my other screen, a Gazelle cannon would have been perfectly fine there and done basically the same thing. But I do want to talk about something that I like, and then why I don't like why it's being done the way it's being done, which is this pair of VABs and the Crotal that are up in Foxtrot. So I really like the aggression that this shows. I think this is a very aggressive move from Flowers, a very aggressive probe, and it's actually to a really important spot on the map when playing from this side. If you can wrest control of the plateau from your opponent, starting on the side that Flowers is on, you severely limit their ability to move around the map in the manner they want to, and they really have to try and get back control of that plateau as fast as possible.
100%.
Doing it like this,
yeah,
not great.
So I just want to take a second and say, look, if Flowers is watching this, or if any other newer players are watching this, We have all been there. I was here
Mm-hmm.
last year. Really, like 12 months ago, I was in this sort of position as well, and a lot can change very quickly. If you look at your replays, if you talk to people, if you get some help, we're not trying to bash. We're never trying to bash.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us here in the wargame community, on the discords, things like that, we want more people to play with, doing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
playing the game that we really do enjoy quite a lot, and well, we want them
100%.
to be very skilled as
Yeah.
well. So this is just the note on compositions, like double AMX 10 RC and kills all this, and the Kratal should probably stay up here just to deny helicopters. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think Bikefish and I are gonna do our best to be nitpicky and to be mistaken for being harsh, not because we want to be harsh, but because we really want to give the best feedback that we can. And when people are just starting up the game, unfortunately, that means a lot of feedback. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can grab onto even small bits of it and say, okay, you know, next game I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on having more recon, or I'm going to focus on different force composition, things like that,
And if
then
you can pause again here, where
incremental progress really does work wonders. Go ahead.
yeah. And so, you know, just another note on that too, like having taught a few people some of the basics of this game, I have always found that it's easier to take somebody who's being too aggressive and try and pull them back to, you know, okay, we need to think about preserving our units a little more versus trying to, you know, coax the turtle out of their shell. And as somebody who is normally a very turtle-like player in RTSs, you know, I was the guy who built massive thick walls in Age of Empires 2 just messing around with my friends when I was a kid. You know, I get it. Coming out of the shell is scary, but you have to be able to do that to play this game. So I really like the initiative that play in Fox showed.
Yeah,
Um, but you know, it's just
there's a
a
good
little too
foundation
aggressive.
here to build on
And then
for sure.
I do want to address what's going on in golf here before we continue with the replay, though. So, all these units that are in golf really haven't done anything for this entire match for Flowers. And this is a problem because it's a significant investment of points in what's over here. And part of that is trying to get up through the forest, and the way that that was done was less than ideal. If you zoom out a little bit on the replay here, you'll notice there's a town block kind of in the bottom right hand corner of the screen near the intersection of the roads. If you are not going to be, excuse me, playing more aggressively in golf, that's a really great place to kind of stop and set up, you know, to set up like a couple of units to prevent your opponent from running all the way through golf.
You mean here, yeah.
So yeah, right there. So yeah, so if you're not going to be aggressive and try and play for that far end of golf, that town's a great place to kind of say, okay, I'm going to put, you know, like a double stack of infantry here, and it's going to be something that my opponent has to actually commit to trying to dislodge if you want to go play aggressive elsewhere on the map, like trying to do a plateau push like's been done here. The Legion now are in a fantastic spot.
Yeah, this is
If only
beautiful.
they had some supporting firepower in AA.
Right, and the other thing that I would say about, you know, this approach in golf is, if your intention, as it seems to have been, was to contest the high ground in Foxtrot, what really helps in golf, if you do, like, you can leave stuff here in this town, or you can still try and go and secure this section of woods, and really your goal is this section of woods right here, because this section allows blue to push up onto the plateau and to push into golf. If red takes this and you have the high ground, I mean, Fox and golf, at worst, golf will be contested, and Fox should be just all yours. This is a win condition for this map, because if you lose Bravo, but you have Foxtrot, and you make it a fight over a small amount of golf, your opponent has to either play perfectly, or they're going to be trading very badly for quite some time. So, you know, that's what I would say is, I think the push here was a little bit too far to the side, and the force composition did leave a little bit to be desired. But again, good foundation and good aggressiveness. I really think it's you know, it's one of those things where more practice will really help shape this in a way that is good. But there was fundamental understanding here of, okay, we do want to be aggressive, we do want to move forward, and I think particularly the Foxtrot push is very very daring for somebody who's new at the game. It's certainly not something I ever tried, man.
Yeah. And I mean, I think also it's worth saying at this point that, you know, you can kind of see how isolated those Legion are, and with not having any other units in Fox, and with this giant stack of stuff just getting ground down here because it has nothing that can take on these 10 RCs, you know, Had those points been diverted elsewhere, it could have been a very stable position on the map. Trying to do this push in this way without that much fire support just isn't really going to work very well, especially playing against the deck that Flowers is playing against in this case, which is EC Moto. It is going to move very fast. It does have very strong wheeled firepower options, but what is going to cause it to, cause it some measure of consternation is having actual tanks. And unfortunately, the B2 Brennus is not an actual tank in this context. We need
Now,
something more akin to a Leopard 2.
Flowers' deck did have the 2A4, does it not?
It has Leclerc 2A4, 2A1. We just never see any of them come out.
Right. So if you see that you're playing against Moto and you have the 2A4, I personally highly recommend that tank, because properly supported, the 2A4 is a brick wall against most Moto decks. Not every Moto deck and not every situation, but certainly a standoff situation. Like, if you had a 2A4 with a little bit of recon around here, your opponent's Moto deck just really can't push this very well at all. Right? Because the 2A4 can just one-shot pretty much everything.
And especially against EC Moto, where like your primary anti-tank plane option, depending on how the deck is built, is going to be a Peace Rhine. If the 2A4 is at full HP and the Peace Rhine shoots it from the front, the Peace Rhine cannot kill it in one pass.
Right, like, will not happen, as opposed to the Brennus, which gets eaten for lunch by the Peace Rhines. Like, I think it's one of those things, as you gain experience with this, and as you begin to recognize the strengths and weaknesses, not only of your deck, but of your opponent's deck as well, those sorts of, okay, I'm playing against, oh man, this is unfortunate.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate. But I think this also goes to show that, in a ranked environment, you have to be ready to defend against people being sneaky and such. I had a game, just for example, where I was playing on the side of the map that Flowers' opponent is playing on, and it was a game I by all means should have lost from just a deck matchup standpoint, but because I was able to sneak things around the side and my opponent wasn't prepared for it, I ran some stuff into his base. I killed a CV and a bunch of artillery, and put my opponent really on the back foot there. And so in ranked, you have to assume that everybody is playing to win, and you just have to be prepared, to counter things that are sneaking around.
Well, and my other comment here too is, I think some of the buys have not necessarily been responsive to what's going on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I used to do as well. I used to kind of ignore what my opponent was doing and just say, okay, let me just focus on what I'm doing, and if I get the right force composition, then I'll magically win the game. And the unfortunate thing is that, there's somebody else who's trying to win as well. And so the buys that you have to respond, they have to create what you want while denying what your opponent wants. So this Gazelle should have probably stood over here and auto-cannoned this from afar and helped the reservist win, and then buying double Serval here, probably not the best, when what you have to deal with is Fallschirmjäger 90 that are on the far side of golf, right? And we saw this a little earlier with the Roland 3 buy. There's been the Peace Rhine, but everything except this one Brennus is gone. It's not the worst buy ever, it feels a little bit like a script rather than a response.
And I think this calls to a point of advice that I have seen people take really well, from the standpoint of, hey, this is something that will help from a conceptual standpoint, which is this game, people will always talk about initiative and stuff like that, and it's always presented as this nebulous high concept that, somebody in Ivory Tower is telling you must take the initiative. But really what it boils down to, especially at lower levels and such, is ultimately your decisions are probably not going to be what wins you the game. It's going to be making fewer mistakes than your opponent. Until you get up to the point where you're in, top end tournaments, top of the leaderboard, your skill isn't going to carry the game. So what you need to think about instead is not, how am I going to beat my opponent? It's how am I going to make my opponent react to what I'm doing on the map? Because by forcing your opponent to react to you, you are inherently giving your opponent an opportunity to make a choice. And they might make the wrong one. And if you keep presenting them opportunities to make choices, eventually they make the wrong one. And, if you can capitalize on it, also.
Yeah.
But you have to make your opponent react to what you're doing.
It sort of goes hand in glove with what we said earlier with, wanting to be aggressive, and that is a really good foundation. This is something too. This Brennus needs to be microed. So these TPZ folks probably carrying Jaeger off the veterancy. Yeah. The Brennus is way too close. So we had engagement back here. Attack move the Brennus, or stop the Brennus, and let it use its main gun to kill those transports and damage the infantry inside, and then just mop up everything else there. And then honestly wait. Like, we had an engagement here. You should know that there's a Legion 90 in this section. A Brennus driving into that will be a cost-effective trade for your opponent, which is never something that you want to let happen. And I think it's a little unfortunate too. Like, there comes a point in games, particularly sort of at this scale of things, where it's just over. It's taking a long time to get there though, and this is one of those where I think it's always tough to say, and I'm not like, I think at this point the trades have been going so bad that your play would need to be perfect to recover from it. So if anything, this is again not to bash, it's to say, really truly, when we say that the opener matters a ton, the first 5 minutes matters a ton, the first minute is just incredibly important. This is why. So now these Legion 90 and Vabs, things that could do really well grinding out your opponent's infantry here, they're just going to be outnumbered, right? So some ways to avoid this: don't let the Peace Rhine have its way of things, keep this Roland 3 protected, there should be something else in front of it, little things like that. And by the way, the Leopard 2A4 would kill, it would have killed the 10 RC, it would have been really nice support for earlier actions on this side, where the Legion 90 got shredded by fire support from afar while they were trying to get into this forward position. So there's a lot going on.
And then you can see that Flower's opponent is bringing up a CV here. They clearly feel confident they have enough control over these areas to get into that. I don't know if that's necessarily going for Charlie or Fox at this point, but like, CV buys are another way to kind of influence what your opponent is doing. Coming out and saying, hey, you need to be aggressive and do these things doesn't just mean being on the attack and such. It can mean sometimes, okay, I've just pushed my opponent out of this area, I bought the defensive units, but I don't have the supporting assets to go after something again. I'm gonna buy my heavy artillery, or okay, I took a beating from some planes, my AA is a little depleted, I'm gonna buy one of my ASFs. That's not to say that you can't react to what your opponent's doing, but just that you need to be thinking about it in a way that you're trying to get them to react to you.
Yeah, and on that note, CVs win the game. They can also lose you the game, kind of ironically. So we have I don't understand ticking +1, and this Panzerkampfwagen Leopard 1 was bought a fair amount earlier, kind of came up to Fox, and then is now in the zone. This is 145 points. And with 145 points, well, for one, that's a Leopard 2A4 and 15 points to spare. It could also be a 2A1 and 45 points to spare, and that could really be directed to keeping Charlie safe, because when you're getting pushed up this hard near your 2-pointer, if they countercap it, which blue was there, I believe, that is more deleterious to you than the Panzerkampfwagen Leopard 1 up here in Foxtrot is helpful, right? So people think cap, get those zones, and that is a good way of thinking about it, unless it begins to cost you your control in other sections of the map. So exactly. I've actually, when I was having some people help me out during a game, I went to buy a CV, and the response that I got was, if you buy that CV right now, you lose. And the whole reason they said that is because buying that CV would have prevented me from having the tools that I needed to handle my opponent's push that they knew was incoming, and I should have realized as well, right? And I don't understand that has... Jeez, that's... So the blue 4 player has been pushing Charlie the whole game. If I wanted to turn him on his head, it would be to crush what's here and prevent everything else from coming up there. That's my first priority, and that's above putting a CV in Foxtrot. So at this point, I think we'll go a little bit quicker, and then we'll take a look at Flower's deck. And the goal with that look at Flower's deck is not going to be to say, okay, let's take this, scrap it, and make something meta, because quite frankly, I think that it's good to have people use incrementally better versions of things they like to use and like to play with. And honestly, like, if we give everyone a carbon copy, the game's going to be boring. So the way that we discover new combinations that work in new meta is through experimentation. So I don't want to just say, hey, we're going to make this a meta deck, but maybe we can offer some advice on particularly seeing the style of play here. Some of the tools that we think might help you achieve what you want to achieve a little bit more effectively than what's currently going on. So that's that's the spirit that it'll be looked at in. And by the way, if you attack move the Legion 90, they'll use their secondary there. A right click, they won't. So that's going to be the spirit of that as this game draws to a close, and
we'll make it go faster.
yeah.
But yeah, just to touch on the deck thing, like, you know, I've had it up on my other screen this entire time, and you know, the overall composition of this deck is not bad in the grand scheme of things. You know, there's definitely some unit choices that are a little suboptimal in terms of what they're trying to do, but the intent to do these things is actually there. But I do want to stop here and look at the KD real fast before we get to the deck. Like, you can just see how the trades kind of piled up as this game went on, and how it really turned into, you know, Flowers just not being able to keep enough units in play in order to stop what's going on. You know, Understand had a lot of time to, you know, to build up strength, a lot of stuff that did not die, and was able to come back in and keep doing things in the fight. And I think that was just ultimately what was really important here. You know, Flowers just kind of got to the point where you got snowballed. And this happens. You know, there's a game that was put up on this channel that has me in it, but he's being looked at from the other side, where if you want to see what a snowball looks like from the winning side, watch the game that I played against Maurice, where he's going to snowball me because because I just can't manage to continue to kill enough stuff. And that's kind of the same thing that happened here.
Right, and that should also be a little bit comforting to hear, because I mean, it happens to people of all skill levels, right? It's one of the ways that people win the game, and if you can turn that around and do that to your opponent, then, well, one day you'll be sitting here with the 1925 kills to 560 losses. So we'll be right back in just a second with a look at Flowers' deck and a couple of short improvements. So we're back looking at the deck that Flowers was using in this game, and the first thing, 54 to 55 activation points, we are getting full utilization, or nearly so, of the available points. And, you know, that may seem like a very small note, but when I first started, I was like, yeah, it's fine, we'll just have like 53 out of 55, because the next thing costs 3 points. Efficient use of activation points is something to consider when building your deck, and you want to be at the maximum or maybe 1 point below it, depending on what you're looking at. So this is good. And Bikefish, do you sort of want to take it away with some small tweaks that we would make?
Yeah, so the first thing I see when looking at this deck is all of the AA is down vetted. That's a big problem from the standpoint of whenever we're dealing with AA, especially missile-based systems, we have inherently a finite set of shots in order to hit a plane or a helicopter that is being engaged. So we just want to make sure we up-vet it all to get the maximum consistency out of it. Second thing, the AMX-30 Roland is really redundant when compared to the Crotale. We don't need the anti-helicopter range on it. It's also pretty low accuracy. Replacing that with a Gepard to get some spag functionality in there, which is going to be really good at helping your Rolands and Crotales actually kill things, because it'll stun them and can do a decent amount of damage on its own, will really help make this tab a little bit better.
Now, just to clarify on that real quick, the base Roland is what Bikefish is talking about there, because the Roland 3 has anti-plane capability that the base Roland does not. So it is a multi-purpose thing. So if we're going to take a look at this, let's just scrap these for right now. We'll put the Crotale back in. We're going to crank that up to Veteran C4. We're going to put the Roland 3. I do tend to like the German one, but if you want the wheels, we can do this as well. Up that.
Any of the Roland 3 systems are fine.
Yeah. And which Gepard would you recommend for this?
A1.
A1? And just briefly, why take the A1 over the cheaper base Gepard?
For the answer to that, watch our forthcoming unit comparison video.
But for right now, it has to do with the stabilizer, as well as the base accuracy. For 10 points, you're getting a lot.
Yeah, base accuracy and stat. Alrighty, and then for mortars, we want to take one of the West German options. It really doesn't matter which one. They are functionally identical in terms of the actual mortar system. It's just a slight trade-off, which we'll go in more to in the comparison video, but either one of those will work. Let's just throw the HS30 there for right now.
Yeah, I mean, even if you wanted to leave this just so that we're, again, only making some minor tweaks, you still can get okay smoke functionality out of this. It's just usually you want to be up with the higher HE values, and the West German ones offer 5 HE, which can be very effective in for indirect fire against infantry, as well as for smoking your own tank. So I would recommend one of these if you want to leave this. I've seen people use it. Maybe it'll change with time.
And
So
then let's go to the Recon tab next, because the Recon tab in EC is an extremely powerful tab. Running the VBL Mistral, I love this unit. It's very nice. We definitely want to upvet it though, because we are treating it as an AA piece, same logic as before. Additionally, in here, Fern's Pother, kind of not great. What sniper teams usually have going for them is that exceptional stealth. But when they are shooting, these guys do tend to get spotted a lot easier. If you did want to stick with double recon infantry, I'd recommend taking another card of Commandos Para in the Puma Pirate to give yourself some sort of heli-dropped infantry capability. You can also take another card in the ground, or we can add the AMX 1390 as a really good fire support option.
and by the way, I love the AMX 1390. I think it's phenomenal. I would take one of these over the 10RC just because that's sort of my playstyle, is a little bit more incremental than it is, the wild rush that the 10RC lends itself to. What it comes down to is, do you want the helicopter, so the Puma Pirate? Do you want the opener speed with guns on the ground with the RC? Or do you want the 1390 for, this thing will mulch infantry quicker than you might believe. So those are really three good options, but for right now we'll leave it with more infantry, and we'll put them in a helicopter just so that you have two infantry squads here, and this one's a bit more mobile.
And then let's go to the tank tab, because I know you wanted to get there. Based off what Flowers was doing in this game, I think Flowers absolutely love having the AMX 10 RCSB in place of that Apprentice. Both of these tanks are going to kind of fill the same role as in like a light fire support that deals with IFVs and such really well. But the 10RC is going to give you so much more flexibility in that regard, whereas the Brennis is just a little too expensive and it can't quite keep up with the wheeled stuff. Additionally, with the Brennis, that autocannon it has on there, while it looks great on paper, is locked to the same heading as the main gun and will only fire if you micro the main gun on and off. Very hard to get that additional value out of it. So having the RCSB, especially to support that more moto heavy style we saw, would be my recommendation.
Gotcha. So it will help with the opener as well. And one thing I would say is, I don't tend to take 4 tanks in Eurocore just because you do need the activation points elsewhere. And only 2 planes for Eurocore is pretty low. But with that said, I do like that you're not over-relying on planes. Oftentimes new players do over-rely on planes and helicopters, so I don't hate this. As, when I was around the rank of Sergeant Major and Second Lieutenant, I actually went maybe a month or so and said, okay, I'm emptying my plane tabs altogether, so I cannot buy them. So I don't know, it's a bit of a mixed thing. So
but
what do you
however,
recommend for this?
We are going to go. This tank tab is fine otherwise.
Cool.
Definitely what I would recommend. I would recommend running this if somebody really liked the moto stuff. But to your point of the planes, we are going to go make some changes there. But the first thing we're going to do, or I would recommend, is dropping the Tiger Had. In this particular case, I find the Tiger Had to be a little bit redundant with the Paw 2 Tiger for some of the other choices that have been made in this deck. Just to kind of, I really also want to preserve the structure here, because I think that there's some really good things that are happening within here. And not to plug our upcoming videos again, but we are going to go over a couple of the comparison pieces that I'm just going to kind of brush over for now. So go watch those if you want to see why some things may change from other EC decks you'll look at. But let's go to the plane tab now that we have the extra activation points to get that third. I would recommend adding the Rafale upvetted here. While the Rolands are a really good anti-plane system, they are very short ranged, so having a Rafale just kind of helps you extend that. And then additionally, we'd swap the IDS for the Peace Rhine just to give you some anti-helo capabilities.
Well, anti-helo and anti-tank, right? So if you look at in multi-role, and these Mavericks with 26 AP and only 2 are a little bit dicey. Sometimes they do both miss. But, I mean, they're fire and forget. You don't need to maintain vision after they've been launched. And the AIM-9Ls with high accuracy, the 50% here, and you get 4 of them, are actually really wonderful for anti-helicopter work. I don't necessarily recommend calling this in on any and every helicopter that you see, but if you see something like your opponent has a Paw 2 Tiger or something very expensive that's going to threaten an entire flank, this is definitely an option that you can bring in, and I'd recommend taking 2 at Hardened. So if we zoom back out, we've maintained the 3 CVs in the top zone. We have pretty much left this alone, although I'd recommend maybe don't take both the F3 and the Mistral. I think this is going to be the last thing as we look at the infantry tab. Messed around a little bit with the support, very minimally with the tank and recon. Like, there are some good fundamentals here, and I think a couple of these tweaks will definitely help you out. Then to wrap that up, let's take a quick look at your infantry.
So because we're taking the VBL Mistral especially, Manpad Mistral team is really redundant here with all the other stuff that we have. So I'd recommend swapping that out for a card of Rima 85 in the same transport, just because that's going to give you a solid forest fighting infantry with a 20 RPM launcher. We're going to go into more detail about kind of why this is one of the traditional starter cards in those upcoming videos.
And would you recommend up-vetted or down-vetted here?
I'd start down-vetted and see how it feels from there.
Yeah, and just the general note on that is any infantry, because the Panzergrenadier 90 in the Martyr 2 are expensive, some of the tanks here are expensive, Eurocorps units can run on the more expensive side. If you notice you're only using like half a card of one of these, just come back in and up-vet them. You'll get additional value out of that unit. And, well, if you weren't running out before, then that's not an issue, because you're not going to use the entire card. So that'll do it. I hope you maybe take a look at some of the changes we made to this deck and some of the suggestions we made during the video, Flowers, if you see this, and, well, best of luck. Always, don't be afraid to hop on the Discord, talk to people, get in some friendly games with people on the Discord, and, look forward to seeing you.